Okay, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Marin Communication Forum on Transitional Kindergarten. My name is Peg Offod, and I'm the Executive Director for First 5 Marin, and it's my honor and pleasure to be with you here today in person. Who would have thought this day would have ever come again? It's so exciting to be here and see you all not on a Zoom screen. It's been so long. I carried a baby for a full 9 months. I had the baby. She turned 1 on Saturday, and I'm just meeting some of you for the first time, so it's been quite a while. I got ready this morning and came out of the bedroom, and my 3-year-old looked at me and she was like, "Mommy?" And I'm like, "Yes." She's like, "Why do you look like that?" And I was like what? And I thought she was gonna say, "Oh, you look beautiful," or something like that. And she's like, "You look stiff," like this. It's probably because I'm wearing real clothes today, so, but it feels good. It feels good to be here. Before joining First 5 Marin in August of 2020, right at what we now know seems like the beginning of the pandemic, I worked across the state at the intersection of early childhood and policy and systems change work. I thought about and decided that this opportunity to serve as ED for First 5 Marin was an exciting opportunity because of the window of opportunity that was opening, the one in which we've all been waiting for far too long. The one where there's a common understanding of the importance of the earliest years in our children's lives. The one where there is leadership at the state and local levels who are championing issues for our youngest children and families. And we're at a crossroads today. And it was that potential for today that really excited me and led me to accept the challenge and opportunity to come to Marin. My parents and I immigrated here with nothing. I'm the product of systems of care that worked and sometimes didn't work, and I know the importance of good teachers, strong communities, and access to services and supports, and the difference that these things can make in the lives of our most disenfranchised children and families. We're all here today because, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so we're all here today because of the faces on this screen and so many more. We're here because we're early childhood educators, we're public school administrators, advocates, teachers, parents, grandparents, and we want to build a system that serves our children the best. And the only way that that can happen is if we grow that system together and nurture it. We each come to the table with a wealth of knowledge and experience that's valuable, and I look forward to seeing how we come together today and as a county as we move forward to create a system that embraces what we know to work and each of our community's unique needs. We won't have all the answers today, of course, but we'll be one step closer. So with that, it is my honor and privilege to introduce a woman who needs no introduction in this room, but I'm going to say a few words anyways. Mary Jane Burke serves as Marin County Superintendent of Schools. Marin County Office of Education serves more than 40,000 students. Mary Jane has always been committed to providing the highest quality of programs and services for all her students and has been in the position since 1995. Mary Jane has also been a fierce advocate for our littlest learners and a strong partner for First 5 Marin, and we are so very grateful.
Wow, very nice. Thank you so much. 1995, that kind of makes me sound a little old, doesn't it? Yay. So let me just tell you first how excited I am to be with all of you. It's a privilege to be in person, but also it's a privilege to be with people who are like-minded and committed to the young children in our community. And I'm going to try to frame this for you in a way, as you listen to my remarks, I'd like you to listen to them within this context. Marin County finds ourselves with a strong foundation as we approach UPK, Transitional Kindergarten, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but it's a strong foundation as long as we ensure that we follow the information that we have. And in my view, We need to honor the mixed delivery system that exists in this county. It is amazing. It is something we have worked on for so many years. We have to ensure that what we do is make sure that our littlest learners, right, our young children, have high quality, developmentally appropriate, play-based opportunities, right? That's what we need. We know that that will make the difference, and the research shows that. And so if we can think of that context as we listen throughout today's amazing program, that's what we're headed for, and we are ready. We have the foundation in this community to be able to move forward. I want to just take a moment and remind us, and I won't mention all the right people, but I'll mention those that came to mind as I thought about it. There are people who came before us whose shoulders we stand on, who actually were the people in our community many years ago who set the standards, who helped us see the vision, and in many ways had to drag us, or sometimes me, right? Drag me forward. And so, on the shoulders of the amazing Ethel Siderman, Kay Warnert, Heather Ravani, Amy Reich, Annalise Bailey, Liz Burns, and Tom Peters. Let's hear it for them. They're so great. And so I I think for all of us, right? There's people that came before. They sort of set like our road, and sometimes we follow, sometimes we wiggle, but whatever we do, we have to make sure that we're always putting first and foremost the critical issues that face the youngest children and their families in our community. I want to also just say a moment to thank First Five, to Michelle and Paga for what happened today, but also to make note that our First Five has continued to raise awareness and amplify the most important issues in this community on behalf of children and families. And that has made a difference, these communication forums. So thank you very, very much for that. We really appreciate it. Also, your presenters today, you're getting the State Superintendent of Public Instruction. That's like a big deal, right? That Tony's going to actually be here and share with you his vision. So that's amazing. And then you're getting these amazing researchers from Berkeley and then local experts that will be talking with you and giving us a chance to think more about how we're going to ensure what happens here in this community. I do want to press pause for a minute and acknowledge that Marin County finds itself where it is for a very particular reason, and it has to do with our Marin Community Foundation. And some of you may know, some of you may not know, but over 14 years or so, 12 to 14 years, the Marin Community Foundation, all those years ago, began to plant sort of the vision about what can it look like in a community where we don't work in silos, where it isn't about what's good for little kids and then what's good for school-age kids. And many of you know this term, the pre-K3 system. MCF has supported this system by over $12 million in these years. But more importantly, they provided us with the opportunities to learn more in a safe way, but in a clear way, with courage and with high expectations that we took on this very important work. And without individuals with that commitment and a laser focus, this just doesn't happen. Money isn't enough, as we all know. It helps for sure, right? It can help. In fact, the MCF table, could you maybe send a little more money our way? But we could use a little more money, right? But I want to just take a second or a moment to have us all breathe in the amazing work of Don Jen and Jonathan Logan. Thank you very much. Now let's do a really big clap. $12 million clap. Thank you. And then lastly, and I was practicing, I'm sure you all, you practice your speech to make sure you don't miss something, and this brought tears to my eyes. And it will again, but I want to say to all of you that work with our young children, whether it's home-based, center-based, whatever it looks like in this mixed delivery system, during the darkest days of COVID, you were there. You never shut down. You opened your doors. You provided for families. You provided for our children. You led the way. And frankly, it's on your backs that we were able to open the K-12 system. So for that and so much more, thank you. Uh-oh, standing O, standing O. Oh boy. Okay, so when I got ready to think about, how would I talk about all this today, I decided that I was going to go backwards and give you some background. The year is 2008, all right? So that's where we are. The year is 2008. In our community, each year, there's a meeting that happens with all the public people that make policy in Marin County. So I want you to imagine, you'll like some of them, you won't like some of them, but hold the thought. These are the people that serve as your city council members, board of supervisors, you're the trustees that are elected in our school boards, your superintendents. This group comes together. And all the way back in 2008, there was a conversation about what's the most important policy issue that we should bring forward at this time. And the answer was little kids, early childhood, preschool for all. What are we going to do, right? So that's 2008. And here's what it looked like on that particular night. Everybody came together. And the speaker was the renowned economist, David Kerp. So if you can think about, many of you know that name. He wrote the book, The Sandbox Investment. And this essentially provided the link between what strong early childhood programs can do for little children for the rest of their life, but also the economics behind it. And so every single person in that room that evening got a book. The Sandbox Investment, their responsibility was to read it and then pass it on. And so it was very good. David Kerp is, he's straightforward. He gets to the point. He doesn't try to say it nice, right? He's really very, very, very clear. And at the end, when there's a time for Q&A, right? And you know how when Q&A happens, what happens is sometimes people don't really want to ask a question. They want to make a statement. So picture when that happens. So it was one of those moments, and the hand that raised was from a trustee. And the trustee raised his hand and said, hey, I actually think you got it wrong, something on that line. And so first of all, the crowd's going, what's going on here? But he said, I actually think what you need to focus on is those early childhood preschool teachers aren't preparing those little kids for school. They're not ready for kindergarten, right? So that was the statement. Some people like, oh boy, what's he gonna say? And what David Kerp did was took a pause, looked straight on at the trustee, scanned the entire room, and said, on the contrary, sir, it is the K-12 system who has much to learn from the early childhood community. And I want you to know that from that moment on, when we started and that, talked about kid first, what are we going to do, kid first policy, etc., our community began to coalesce on behalf of young children and those that support him. Then what happened next is in our community, there was an effort, many of you in this room were directly involved in it, and it involved the Strong Start Initiative. And that was an initiative that was intended to get the voters of our county to vote to provide $12 million every single year for young children, and particularly to ensure the most vulnerable kids had access to high quality preschool. And so that was a coalition of many people who worked together. The bad news, we didn't win, but we did get 63% of the vote. in this county. And then when you actually counted it down, we didn't lose by more than 3,000 votes total, given the number of voters. So just for you to know. But it provided an opportunity for all of us to work together. And what's happened since then? People have continued to work together, right? People are working together. And now here we find ourselves in this important moment when our only option is getting rid of the silos. Our only option is working together and doing it as a strong coalition on behalf of our kids. And so for all of you that are here, and we thank you for being here, if you can enter these next hours, right, thinking about our single focus, and that is what's best for the children. How is it that we can work together to ensure that when we talk about all the words about what we want for our young kids, that we don't focus on some or most, but every single student throughout our community? There is not another county that is better situated to approach this work because of the Marin Community Foundation and all the work that you've all done. There isn't another county that's more ready. However, ready has to include strong, meaningful collaboration. We can't just pretend that we're working together, because that's not what our kids need or what our kids deserve. And that is, I think, our bottom line in terms of our call to action. Let me go back to, we have a strong system, right now, that is available to us to use. We know what it looks like when kids get what they need. It's developmentally appropriate, it's play-based, it's high quality. Staff actually gets the supports and training and time they need to be able to hone their skills, whether they are in the preschool, early childhood area or in the K-12 area. And we cannot just make assumptions that we know what to do when it comes to the brain, the whatever of the 4-year-old, because get ready. Right now we're talking 4-year-olds. Guess what we're doing next year or the next year? It'll be 3-year-olds. And before we know it, right, Annalise Bailey, we're going to be back to the infant programs for sure. So I just want to end where I started. And say, and let me get back to this. I want to end where I started. I want to make this one quote from C.S. Lewis. Children are not a distraction from important work. They are the important work. And so, Ethel, Kay, Heather, Amy, Annalise, Tom, Liz, and all the others that came before, please know that we appreciate your work. And to all of you, thanks in advance for the work you've done and the work you will do. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Mary Jane. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Bruce Fuller, who is a professor at UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Education. Dr. Fuller is a sociologist who delves into how institutions, large and small, attempt to lift the learning and well-being of children. He's written a number of books, including his newest book, When Schools Work, that delves into why student achievement climbed for nearly 2 decades in Los Angeles and how a colorful quilt of civic advocates powered a variety of reforms. A California native, Dr. Fuller previously served as education advisor to the California legislature. Following graduate school at Stanford University, he worked as a research sociologist at the World Bank, then taught comparative policy at Harvard University before returning to the Bay Area. And a fun fact, Dr. Fuller was a speaker at a forum First 5 Marin hosted about 18 years ago. So let's give him a warm welcome back.
Great to see everybody in person. You guys are looking pretty sharp, actually. Also, I did not carry a baby over the last 2 years. But as Lee and I were talking beforehand, I've been waiting anxiously for grandchildren, which has not come to pass either. So, thanks, Pega. Mary Jane's a tough act to follow. I'm going to do a couple things in the next few minutes. One is to set the transitional kindergarten movement in context, and then say a little bit about the strengths and weaknesses as I see it as we start to implement this ambitious expansion of early childhood education. And then I'm going to be joined by three experts here locally who will talk a little bit and entertain your questions. So as we're going forward, think about your questions. I think we'd have note cards maybe or slips of paper which will come up to me, and we'll try to speak back and engage you all in the next hour or so. If I could go to the first slide, I did want to say one thing before jumping into the old PowerPoint, and that is what Governor Newsom has done with legislative allies like Kevin McCarty from Sacramento, the Speaker of the Assembly who ran a state pre-K program several years ago before becoming a politician. What these men and women have done in Sacramento is quite remarkable. If you look at the budget in the current fiscal year going forward over the next 2 or 3 years, there's money to provide 500,000 new childcare and pre-K slots, 500,000 kids. About half of that would be TK enrollment, but the other half is through CSPP, the state preschool program. There's also more money for alternative payments for informal care providers. This is really a comprehensive strategy to expand and improve the quality of early care and education, not limited to TK, which I know is our focus. In addition, President Biden, as you know, is trying to expand Head Start. He's been trying to push towards universal pre-K. He's 1 vote short in the U.S. Senate. But looking back to our predecessors in this field, Lee and I were talking about Patty Siegel, who was an early mentor of mine, who founded Bananas in the 1970s, one of the first R&R agencies. I mean, this is 2 generations, mainly of women, who have created an enormous political movement in this country. And I think we've got to recognize the breadth of this and the depth of it. And this is, in a sense, just the beginning in California. So in that context, let me just briefly, in just a few minutes, kind of walk through what I see as the advantages and disadvantages of TK. And the disadvantages I put out for you all to consider as we start to implement and put the details into this general plan that the governor and the legislature have provided. First of all, the TK legislation for the first time has provided a very stable funding source for 4-year-olds. And that's through the Proposition 98 set-aside. In the 70s, California voters put forward Proposition 98, which ensures that about 46% of the state budget every year has to go to K-12 education or to the community colleges. And now TK is part of that Prop 98 guarantee. So if the recession, then when the next recession does come, and there are downturns, 4-year-olds will be protected in ways that they haven't been protected before from economic downturns. The other advantage here is that the guarantee, the set-aside, brings on board the support of organized labor. And that we might want to talk about that. Personally, I think that's a mixed bag. But it has provided pretty much guaranteed support for 4-year-olds, probably moving towards 70 to 80% of 4-year-olds over the next 4 years. And that budget is protected constitutionally. It's protected now politically because of labor's support. The other advantage that most of you are familiar with is that this is going to provide livable wages for tens of thousands of pre-K teachers over the next 4 to 5 years. We can talk about the history of that, but you all know that state pre-K teachers, Head Start teachers, informal providers are terribly paid. Leah's Institute at Berkeley has detailed this over the years, and now many teachers, not all, but many teachers will be winning livable wages. The funding does free up potentially to expand enrollments of 3-year-olds. In California, our data suggests that only about half of all 3-year-olds are in any center-based program. So whereas about 70% are in some kind of center-based, 4-year-olds are in center-based programs. Now, this, of course, requires many of you to turn on a dime here and to be agile in terms of how you may swivel towards serving more 3-year-olds and even 2-year-olds, if those that are out of diapers at least. But for the first time, we have revenue sources for expanding enrollments of 3-year-olds. One challenge, I think, in Marin County and other counties is that now you have a lot of local authority and much more funding to try to provide and build this integrated system that Mary Jane is talking about. How do you all come together to cooperate to build a much more coordinated and synchronized system 0 to 5 with more resources and with a good deal of local authority? Luckily, the State Department of Education doesn't always know what the heck they're doing. And the positive side of that is it gives you more flexibility and slack to do your own planning. And finally, as Mary Jane alluded to, I think one big advantage is that you all as early childhood professionals can move the K-12 system towards more progressive pedagogy, which really engages and motivates kids. Early childhood, as you all know, is really pushed against this sort of test-driven, proficiency-based system, which came with No Child Left Behind. That continues to evolve, but now that as we get schools ready for children, not the other way around, that provides a lot of oomph and a lot of push to really move towards much more engaging forms of teaching in the early elementary grades. Now, there are some risks and challenges. We go to the next slide, please. And this is kind of my opening short list. As you all know, there is a threat to community-based pre-K programs. There's got to be a lot of serious conversation, as Mary Jane emphasized, a lot of serious conversation and engagement over how this field is going to evolve without threatening the existing base of NGOs and community-based programs. We can't do this in a way that's eliminating providers. That would be really stupid. And to Sacramento's credit, there is more funding for CSPP. There's more regulatory flexibility that's being provided so that CSPP providers can move towards 3-year-olds and 2-year-olds. There's definitely a lot of interest in more full-day, full-year programs through state pre-K. So the state's doing what it can, but I think Mary Jane's right. It's up to local folks to kind of have serious candid conversations to figure out how this puzzle's got to be fit together. I think there is a risk with TK, at least in the short term, over how school principals and elementary teachers make sense of TK classrooms. We don't know a lot about what's going on in TK classrooms, but we do know there's some early pressure on TK teachers to think about testing in the 3rd grade. And a lot of the pushback in Sacramento when the TK legislation was moving through the legislature, a lot of the pushback was this concern from CSPP providers, the Head Start Association, that TK could start to look like middle school classrooms, right? So we really have to raise this with our friends in K-12 or the friends in the county office, and to make sure that there's serious professional conversation across the P3 spectrum. I think the other worry is that our CSPP and Head Start workforce is much more diverse than our K-12 teaching force. And again, Leah's shop has really detailed this in rich and informative ways. Because of CDA, because of Head Start's history, because how state preschool followed on the traditions to some extent of federal Head Start, we've grown a culturally rich, linguistically rich workforce, which is not reflected in the K-12 workforce. So again, we've got to think about how these two subsystems talk to each other. We know that a lot of TK programs only run half day. My shop is coming out with a paper next week which shows that a third of the districts in California have fewer than 12 TK kids. Not so much in Marin, but well, we do have like in Kentfield, and we've got some small districts in Marin that have very limited experience with TK. And as they start to grow TK, they may rely only on 2.5, 3 hour a day programs, which doesn't quite cut it if you're a parent with a full-time job. So I know the panel's going to get into wraparound and again how we fit these puzzle pieces together. The logic of collective bargaining and the rationalization of teachers' roles is a worry. There's in K-12, for better or worse, there's a more militant union perspective on how we have specified the roles of teachers in formal contracts. You know, you have teachers saying, well, I'm not going to stay past 3:10 in the afternoon for PD because my contract says I can go home. I mean, this sort of lack of collective spirit, I think, is worrisome in K-12. I don't want to overgeneralize, but it's something we want to think about going forward. And I guess my final point is let's stay focused on the 0 to 5 agenda. I do think legislative leaders are aware of this. I do think because of CSP increases, alternative payment increases, I think there is an awareness and a consciousness that this is just not a story about 4-year-olds, right? This needs to be a comprehensive family support system with paid family leave and other supports for struggling families. But I do think the TK conversation may distract us over the next couple years from the 0 to 5 agenda. Okay, and then the final slide, and I will quit talking at you didactically. We're conditioned at Berkeley just to talk at people. We never actually listen. So. These are things we don't know much about. So if you think that the experts know what the hell they're doing, just set aside that assumption, right? There's a lot of things we don't know what we're doing, and a lot of data gaps. We don't know much about the existing quality of TK classrooms. We don't know much about the variability in quality. We've only had one systematic evaluation, which didn't really illuminate too much at the classroom level. We don't know which kids are going to benefit from UTK over time. There's a lot of rhetoric in the legislation about narrowing disparities in kids' early learning. We know in California that by age 2, there's already racial and social class disparities in kids' early oral language development, in their recognition of words, in how they gesture with parents and communicate with adults. We know these disparities are sharp and they appear early, and the legislature has a lot of rhetoric about it, but we don't really know how this program's going to roll out to narrow disparities. Maybe it's going to be the Kentfields and the Rosses that expand most rapidly, right? Maybe it's going to turn out that we increase disparities in kids' early learning. We don't really have a data system yet in the State Department of Ed. Ask Tony about this. Ask him, Tony, how are we going to track narrowing early disparities? Don't embarrass him, but just ask it diplomatically. We don't know much about how principals are integrating TK teachers into the elementary system. We need to know more about the role of TK teachers, how they're feeling in this organization. Are they feeling pressures around testing, et cetera? And finally, there's a big ambition to see TK as providing career ladders, especially for women of color, teaching in state pre-K, teaching at Head Start, getting to higher salary levels, but we don't really know how that career ladder is going to unfold. And Tony doesn't have a system for tracking teachers over time, so it may be a couple years before we know about this. So long story short is we have a lot more to do in terms of knowledge development. There's high aspirations for this implementation. There's high expectations for kids, and we need to develop ways in which we can actually observe whether these virtuous aspirations are coming to pass. Okay, so I'm going to stop there and ask my panelists to come on up, and we'll get into a conversation. Some of these folks you know, Adine Gladmore, Amy Carter, Leah Austin. I was thinking, I keep hearing there's a lot of Stanford alums in Marin County, but too bad, because you're hearing a lot from Berkeley. Okay, I'm going to ask each panelist, maybe Amy, Eileen, and Leah, to just introduce themselves and talk a little bit about how their work relates to TK.
Terrific. Well, I'll go ahead and start. I am Amy Carter. I'm the Assistant Superintendent of Education Services at the Marin County Office of Education. So I have the privilege of working with Superintendent Burke every day. As we're stepping forward into this UPK role, the county offices across California have been asked to support and help facilitate each district as they're drafting their own plan for their region for universal pre-K. So me and my team are supporting that work. We're making sure that each district has the data they need and understands their choices. So that's the work that we get to do as a county office.
Okay, hey everybody, I'm Adine Gladmore. I think most of you know me, Executive Director of Marin Childcare Council, which is our county's local resource and referral. And I'm actually one of Patty Siegel's mentees. I've been in the R&R world for over 20 years now, and so Patty was that strong, passionate, loud woman who I was terrified of in the first few years of my profession, but I tried to be her sometimes, and she fought the good fight, and she did it. She was a trailblazer, so it was lovely to hear you talk about her. The R&R of the county we're the main link to all the childcare programs in the county, so we have direct access to all of the childcare centers, family childcare homes, unlicensed providers, and our state-funded programs. So really our big connection is that we can link the district to those programs, but also a huge role we play is working with parents. And it's critically important for our parents to understand in the county that TK is a part of universal preschool. So I just keep on saying that TK is one part of a universal preschool system. So parents have options. So our job as an R&R, and one we take very seriously, is to let our parents know all of their choices. They can stay in their family childcare, they can go stay in their childcare center, they can go to a private preschool, part-day enrichment program. They do not need to attend TK. If they want to go to TK, that's fantastic. But that really is something that will be our role as TK unfolds and moves forward. And we are excited to partner with the school districts to let them know that if they want to partner with their private programs or the state-funded programs, they need to know about blending funding, they need to know about how to create a more supportive full-day situation for our younger children, that we can connect them. And we really encourage them and hope that they will use our current infrastructure to really build this universal preschool.
Leah.
Hi, good morning. I'm Leah Austin. I'm the Director of the Center for the Study of Childcare Employment, and I just have to first acknowledge, like many of you, this is very strange to be here in this room, and my children also, they called it my fancy clothes. I was in my fancy clothes today. Also, I just want to say it's great to be here at First 5 Marin. I started my career in early childhood at First 5 Alameda County, and we used to have lots of Bay Area First 5 forums, and anyway, so it's nice to be in the local community and kind of in our backyard, so I'm glad to be here. So at the center, we call ourselves a research and policy shop, and we focus on the early childhood workforce, so those who are working with children from birth through preschool, or in the case of California, TK. And we are really committed to realizing a publicly funded system where early childhood education is treated as a public good, and where the people who do this work, most of whom are women, and often women of color, are centered and prioritized, that they have their own well-being taken care of, that they can support their own families, that they have the preparation and access to the preparation and training they need, that they have good working conditions, and that they have fair and appropriate compensation. So that's really our mission, and we do our work in the service of that mission. So we document the experiences of early educators, their lived experiences, quantitative data, qualitative data, and we do that with national data, but we also do that here in California and here in Marin County as well. So we, in late 2020, conducted the California Early Care and Education Workforce Survey. This was the first comprehensive representative study of our state's early childhood workforce in over 15 years. So we're really thrilled and excited to have those data. We've been able to document people's experiences in the midst of the pandemic. We know lots now about working environments, well-being, education, experience, and so all of this is especially relevant as California is rolling out TK, expanding preschool, and unfortunately not doing very much about the rest of the system, but helps us understand that and know where we are. And we also have local data here in Marin County. We were really fortunate to work with partners here, the Office of Ed, the Marin County Community Foundation, the Childcare Commission, who brought us in to do a study actually in 2019. So we have some county-based data about your center-based teaching workforce. Really good data about characteristics, status. We identified inequities in working conditions and compensation, all of which is going to be incredibly relevant to your efforts here in the county.
Thanks, Leah. So Amy, I'm going to start with you. We're talking about fitting these puzzle pieces together so that TK meshes with other providers. How have those initial conversations gone from the county office perspective?
Yep, so we're looking at a lot of different sort of permutations that our districts will get to make decisions about as in their planning. Of course, you mentioned the opportunity to do half-day TK, which brings in the complications of the afternoons, and districts would have to think through the full day care. We're also looking at so many different permutations of how to do this. School districts can partner with community state preschool partners to offer blended learning opportunities that includes both programs. They can also do that with our Head Start programs and create those blended learning opportunities. There's also language that allows our districts to partner with locally funded programs or private programs to create those blended models. And then there's other districts that are taking advantage of just extending the window of opportunity. So right now our districts next year will be funded for students whose birthdays are in January and February. But our districts have the opportunity to extend that window and accept students who have even earlier birthdays, just so that they can make sure that they have that age-alike opportunities. So each district is really thinking through, of all those different options, what's going to work best for our parents, and of course, at the end of the day, our parents will make the selection that's best for them and their child.
Great.
Yep.
Nadine, what are you hearing from the Planning Council perspective? What are you hearing from different kinds of providers and parents and groups?
So we're hearing a lot from our ECE community. I think that they're, as Mary Jane said, our early childhood workforce have gone through just extraordinary stress over the past 2 years, and they have done it just so amazingly. I mean, I'm like Mary Jane, I feel teary when I think of all they've done for our community, how they opened their doors. Just remember, we were like bleaching our groceries and they were taking care of young kids. And just to remind you all, early childhood education are small businesses. They're not, they're not governed by a school district. They're all individual small businesses. And they were taking care of our children 0 to 5 who still are not vaccinated. So these women were going into their childcare settings every day, and it's primarily women and women of color, taking care of our youngest children while schools were doing remote learning. And often our programs were opening their doors for students from the school system because the parents needed to be at work, so these children would do remote learning in our childcare settings. So the stress and the trauma that these programs have dealt with over 2 years, policies changing constantly, even the latest, no masks required. But yet our young children 0 to 5 aren't vaccinated. So, parents would have their opinions. There's just so much they've dealt with. And during all of this, there's this train that left the station that says, TK's coming our way. And so our ECE, their heads aren't above water yet. They're still trying to catch up financially, emotionally. I mean, so there's so much that this TK is coming that they're like, well, what does that mean? That means that all of our 4-year-olds are going to elementary schools. How's that going to happen? So I think those are some major concerns and worries. I think this is why I really emphasize that we need to always be using the words universal pre-K program. That's what it is, and TK is a part of that. And after the past 2 years of what our ECE field has done, they need to be recognized and rewarded, and our school districts. But our school districts need to take the time to know what programs are in their community and how they can work with them. Now, saying that, there are great opportunities. I mean, in my world of hoping and really, being so passionate and committed and dedicated to the ECE workforce, I'm hoping that if we're going to raise salaries for TK teachers, we need to start at our teachers who are taking care of our babies, our zeros, not just our TK. So again, maybe with the advocacy and the extra funding, and yes, there's dollars coming in for vouchers, there's dollars coming in for CSPP, but how do we really as a county, and Mary Jane, you're right, we have the ability with all of us here, we're all in the same room, to sit down and say, if we're raising this for our TK, we don't want to lose all of our great preschool teachers to TKs, we want to make sure our preschool teachers are compensated to the same level. And again, there is, I think it's not, I don't want our ECE field to be scared. I want them to embrace this change and understand that what we do, or what you do every day in the classroom, is so important that we should be mentoring our school districts on how to do it well. And that connection, I feel there is a huge opportunity in that county, because I feel that our County Office of Education, we have Mary Jane as our huge advocate. We have an opportunity to be able to hopefully work closely, and for our school districts to utilize our current system, and for our parents to have those choices.
Nadine or Amy?
Sorry, it went on.
I'll just ask Amy or Nadine, do you think school districts in the county are reaching out to community-based providers, or are they just finally hearing about TK? I won't ask for a show of hands.
Well, I can tell you that for sure it is absolutely a requirement of the crafting of the plan. Our team has put together a geographical map for each of those districts. I think it's worth noting that just as you described the burden of the ECE system, that also exists in the pre-K 12 system. And so they're wrapping their minds around a lot right now. But it's definitely a step that's in the process right now. We're pushing out a survey to parents to get a sense of what's needed. Our afternoon is going to be a great opportunity for us to harvest input and the thought partners to really bring back to districts to help them think through the plan. But it's absolutely a requirement for all of our districts to sit down with their local providers and get that input and have that conversation as they prepare something that will serve those children regionally.
Okay.
And I'm happy to take some of the blame for that, because I feel like I've just started reaching out to the school districts, and the R&R is written into that language that the school district need to connect with us. And so I probably should have been doing that a year ago, while we were like distributing masks and PPE equipment and doing all of the rest of the work we were embedded in too. So I am going to be reaching out, and I've reached out to a few who are in here already to share the resources that the R&R can offer to support the districts in really being able to utilize those blended models, the CSPP funding, and really work in really building up the infrastructure that we have. So I'm guilty a little bit of that.
Thanks. Well, we're going to ask for your feedback in just a minute. So, Leah, the state needs at least 11,000 new teachers to implement TK. I'm not sure what that comes down to in Marin County. We need probably 25,000 classroom assistants, given the stronger staffing ratio for TK. What do you see as the first steps on the workforce front?
Well, Ideen, you're speaking my language here, right? I mean, we have to hold TK, and we have to hold the rest of the early childhood system in the same breath, right? Our systems are interconnected. What happens in TK is going to have a huge impact on what happens in the rest of the system. And Ideen, you said, you don't want to lose the early childhood, existing workforce to TK. And for better or for worse, I think you probably won't, because there are so many barriers in place for early childhood educators, our most experienced early childhood teachers, to access TK jobs. With the data we've looked at with our early childhood workforce, you know, the majority of those who are working in centers as teachers have a bachelor's degree. About 30% of those who work in family childcare have a bachelor's degree. The average number of years of experience in the sector of our teachers in California, you know, it's more than 10 years. For center-based teachers, it's 16 years. For family childcare, it's 18 years, right? These are women who have the most experience working with 4-year-olds who really are being told from the state that they are not good enough, that their education and experience is not valued, that it's not the same as somebody coming out of high school with a liberal studies degree who's never worked with 4-year-olds but has an opportunity to go do student teaching and earn their credential, right? Our early childhood teachers can't do that. They can't leave their jobs now to get the credential. And the pathways that are being looked at really are not opening the doors widely for our most experienced early childhood educators who, yes, are also mostly women of color in California, who are really going to be, at this stage, unless we have a big change, shut out of the best paying jobs in the sector. So I really think the first things that we have to do at a local level and the state level are to ask some really critical questions, to set up some equity indicators, and think about at the local level, for example, the way that TK expansion might be rolling out, be asking questions about who's giving input into our plans and policies, who's being asked about how they would like to see this roll out, how they bring their expertise to this system and make sure it's connected to the rest of the early childhood system. Setting up questions that allow us to look at the local level at policies and plans that can answer who benefits from this, who's marginalized, who's left out, who is going to gain and who is going to lose. I think a lot of times we talk about, you know, down the road, oh, you know, we have these unintended consequences of a policy. And yes, you know, there can certainly be unintended consequences, but if we ask the questions now and we ask really critical questions about our communities, our populations, our teachers, and we think through the potential consequences, they're not unintended. They're in front of us, right? And communities can make then really important choices about how plans move forward to ensure that we're centering our early childhood educators and really uplifting and valuing their experiences and using that as an opportunity to be good advocates to the state, right? I think, you know, if the state is hearing from local communities that what their plans are not the best way to implement TK, that they want to make sure programs are connected with our existing system, that our existing experienced early childhood educators are with those 4-year-olds in TK, you know, that's power, right? There is power that at the local level can be really leveraged to bring change at the state.
Great. There's also talk about a P3 credential, bringing that back, which would lower the access barriers a little bit for teachers moving into TK, but a lot of this is going to take time.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think what's really interesting with the P3 credential and do we create this specialist credential, which, you know, is great. I have no opposition to creating something that's focused on young children. I think what's really interesting is thinking about the pathways to that, you know, access, how are we laying those pathways out, and what power really the state has to make change to our existing credentialing system, right? There are loopholes. There are ways you can get a credential now if you work in a private school. If you know, there are other things that qualify. So we could, as a state, say, we're going to look at that teacher who could have a master's degree in early childhood and have 15 years experience and make those same exceptions that we make for the multiple subject credential now without having people go through a whole bunch of other, you know, loopholes, and be ready to teach TK now, right? That could happen. There's nothing other than political will and changing statute. Like statute gets changed all the time.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's open it up to your questions, comments. We heard some moaning just moments ago, so I know there's passion out there. Yes, in the back. Could you stand up? Sorry.
A lot of talk about surveying parents to see what they need,
Yep.
and I just feel like what's best for young children seems to be getting lost in the language a little bit. I am the director of daycare and preschool. I've been there for 19 years. In our pre-K program, we have a 1-to-5 ratio. A big reason for that is a lot of our early fours come in. Without self-regulation skills developed already. It takes months to teach them how to say it in 10 or 15 minutes or more. Throughout the pandemic, we've noticed a lot of kids coming in pre-K without bathroom mastery. Without the ability to use the bathroom independently. It's a big concern for me that I'm sending off. You guys are going to get 3 of my kids that have never had pre-K this year because the cutoff went back so far all of a sudden. One of them is not potty learned. How are you guys going to deal with that in the TK classroom? What are the ratios like? Who's going to help a child who's crawled under the table and having a complete fit because he can't write his name like the other kid? Or the one that poops in his pants because he's not really potty learned even though the parents say he is at home. I'm worried about those kids.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Susan Gilmore. I am the founder and CEO of the North Bay Children's Center, which has been operating for 33 years now across 2 counties, and we have 13 locations, 11 of which are on school sites. And I'm excited to say that every single superintendent where we operate programs have been in constant communication with us about how are we going to work together and do this. That's the good news. We don't have the solutions yet. They don't, and we don't. And wraparound care sounds like a really great idea until you try to budget for that. Try to budget for the teacher that comes in early in the morning and then leaves, then comes back at 3 in the afternoon. And whose teacher does this teacher belong to North Bay Children's Center? Does it belong to the school district? Are they going to be paid? Who's paying them what? We have to talk about compensation, as Aideen mentioned earlier. We have to be able to bring our 0 to 4, 0, 3, 0, 5, whatever they are, teachers in line with the rest of the K-12 system. And then there's goodwill to make this work and make it seamless for our children, but there aren't a lot of solutions yet. The partners I'm working with are looking to us like, tell us what to do. And we're like, we don't know. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that.
Comments?
Yeah, I think you're making such a good point of how this process is really driving us to strengthen those connections. You talk about the needs of those 4-year-olds and that they are very unique, and I don't think there's any disillusionment in the pre-K-12 system of the fact that this is going to be a very different undertaking. And it has to look different, and we have to be listening to our early childhood education partners. So part of each district's plan is to answer exactly those questions. What are you going to do about professional learning? What are you going to do about facilities and the unique needs of these little ones? But I think you're also making such a good point in that you're not going to find districts that are going to have that immediate answer. Our districts are right in there with you, looking for answers, coming up with solutions. And I think we're getting a lot of messaging from Sacramento that's kind of giving us some fluidity and giving us the space to have those relationships and answer those questions in new and innovative ways. So I think it's going to be a very interesting growth process for both the K-12 system and the ECE system as we step into these next 4 years together.
And I think what was said is so true. This is about our youngest children. Like, this is what you were saying about, these are about our 0 to 5, and we all know, I mean, everybody in this room, everybody in the world knows that that 0 to 5 is critical learning time. It's critical development, and so we have to keep that in the foremost of our planning. The other thing is about parental choice. You know, Susan, what you're talking about, these long days. Many, and we know from working the R&R where we get parents calling looking for childcare, many women want their children close to their work. Because if there's an emergency and your young 3-year-old is somewhere, you want to be able to go and get to that 3-year-old. They don't necessarily want their child where they live, which is where their school district would be. Also, working parents need care all day long. They need, our low-income families need non-traditional hours. They may be working 2 jobs, going to college. There's so many things that the current childcare system does without even thinking about it. We offer these full-day, year-round programs. There is no spring break. The majority of our childcare programs are not taking, my kids are on a 2-week spring break right now in Petaluma. I'm like, they're not taking 2-week spring breaks. They're not taking 3-month summer off. They're not taking 2 weeks over the holidays off. Our childcare programs are still working, so parents can still work. That's a huge piece of what we do. So as the school districts are thinking about TK for these 4-year-olds, they need to be thinking about what happens to these working parents? How are we going to cater to those working parents? How do we partner and make it no 4-year-old wants to be in an early morning program, then a TK classroom, then going back to an after-school program with 12-year-olds. You know, the planning piece, and I think that that's another huge part of this, is that collaboration between the County Office of Education, between all of the school districts, between the schools, between the childcare programs, the resource and referral, the local planning council, and First 5. We have enough people, and if we aren't all on the same page, it's not going to be effective. So it's time for these people to be in a room and really talk about how we make sure that every single child has the same opportunity in this county and has the same opportunity, whether that be TK, whether that be in a state preschool, and it's equitable. And that is a huge word, equity, because we already know that our workforce suffers in many ways and compared to the school system. So,
yeah, just something to add as the first comment was raised. It also raises, I think, a really important point about the TK teachers themselves, right?
Yeah.
What are they getting? What do they need? And what do school principals, what do districts and superintendents need to do to ensure that the TK teachers are also supported, and that they have, leadership who understands what it's like to be a TK teacher, what those young children on school campuses are going to need. As part of our workforce study that we conducted, we also surveyed TK teachers. And part of what we're learning, we're working on a paper now we'll have out to share, but part of what we're learning, and we learned through some early focus groups, was how isolated many TK teachers feel on school campuses, that many are not feeling really part of the elementary school teachers, and they are not also feeling part of the early childhood community. So they're also feeling isolated and have some real needs to be supported and to be really integrated into early childhood systems of support. Bruce, there's a question out there.
Thanks. I have two quick questions here, and then I'll come around and get to the rest of it.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Craig Thomas Yates, and I'm a disability and senior advocate. And my son and daughter attended pre-K 35 years ago. So they've seen the value of attending pre-K, and that value was developed by Catholic nuns at Dominican University, Garden School, and the quality there was really good. I'm sorry it's gone, it's no longer there. It was an excellent school. And we saw 4 generations attend there. 85% of the students that attended pre-K all finished university degrees and are working in the employment in that form that they achieved to starting with pre-K. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Gina Fromer, and I'm CEO at Children's Council of San Francisco, and I just want to give a shout out to what Aideen is saying. We're seeing you can't think about the child unless you think about the family. It's whole child, it's whole family. And our families in San Francisco, we have wealth and we have poverty and everything in between. And we know our families, it has to be a mixed delivery system, but you cannot have kids getting out of school at 12 o'clock and parents scrambling around, because you destabilize families at that point. And even families with wealth, they get destabilized too. And you saw that during the pandemic, where people who had money and could afford nannies lost their minds because they had to be at home all day. So I'm just saying, it was, we saw the whole spectrum. And all I'm giving is saying that we're local in R&R, we work with providers, we work with families, and that spectrum has to be looked at, and we need a mixed delivery system, because the other side of it is equity. A lot of our families who cannot afford, they get lost in through the cracks, okay? And believe me, it will continue to happen. The last thing I want to say is that we already have a problem with hiring teachers of color. How many teachers of color, Mrs. Burke, are in your district? Right, I've been here 21 years, and I still try to find a black teacher in the school district somewhere. And I know they're there, but believe me, they're not in every classroom. And the research says when you have black teachers, all children benefit from it. So I'm challenging that, because most childcare teachers are people, women of color. So yay, you can add value to that system by bringing these teachers in, paying them a living wage, and training them to get into this system. So I just wanted to give a shout out for that. Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks, Gina. We have 2 questions over here, and then I'll come that way.
I'm actually going to ask a curriculum question. So I know that MCOE has spent a lot of time putting teaching pyramid first and using the frameworks and doing training. I'd really love to see that filter into the TK system. I know there's been a few kindergarten classes that have done it, but that should be like a mandatory for our county to implement, because it gives an even playing field to those TK kids. And it's a program that most of us in the private industry have all been trained in. But it's so important to avoid the behavior logs. Like she was saying, I'm afraid of these 4-year-olds starting their behavior logs in TK when it's normal behavior of a 4-year-old, not necessarily a 4-year-old that's not waking up that morning trying to figure out how to make that TK teacher have a bad day. But how do we teach that to, some elementary school teachers?
That's an important skill, however.
Yeah, it is. But I think that's what I want to hear about. I want to hear about how we as a community are going to help these TK teachers. That 4th grade teacher who might have early childhood from way back when that goes back to TK, how do we help them have the tools? And those are 2 programs that I think are impeccable.
I agree. I think that that's imperative, and this is where, when Superintendent Burke was talking about the work already in our community, I think this is where we're really ahead of the game, because these are relationships and professional development efforts that we've all been engaged in for many years. But my team is the childhood education team is already working on a lot of plans to push the teaching pyramid forward. I know San Rafael has already broadcast early that they're going to spend the summer with those educators focused on the teaching pyramid. But this is a critical point that we're really emphasizing with all of our districts. It's going to take this kind of development, this kind of shift in mindset, not just from our educators, but also from the top leadership at the school, that we're going to have a very different environment. We're going to have groups of children on our campuses with very different needs, and the old ways of approaching these problems just won't work. It won't be aligned. But I can tell you we're already early down the road with making sure that kind of professional development is available and at the fingertips. Another thing that we're doing as the county office is we've applied for a state grant that will hopefully subsidize the opportunities that will be required to get that TK credential. And so we're looking through plans of how do we relieve that financial burden, how do we make that as seamless as possible. We're looking at remote education opportunities with Sonoma, but how do we lift that burden so that anyone that does want to enter and get that credential has the smoothest path possible.
Also,
sorry, go ahead.
I'm just going to say, also teachers that are coming down from 6th grade or 5th grade are supposed to be receiving 4 courses in child development, but that provision's been pushed back by the legislature. So there's also got to be this ongoing concern of whether districts will require transfer teachers to have that extra training. Given what Leah was saying, it's going to take years to produce more specialized TK teachers.
Right, and teaching pyramid takes a year and up to 4 years to go to its fidelity. So it's just a starting.
Yep.
Yep. Those are two programs.
Point taken.
Okay.
Yep.
2 quick questions here.
Hi, Dave Cord. I'm Executive Director of San Geronimo Valley Community Center, and I'm actually a first-time rookie grandfather during the pandemic, so I'm really excited, kind of back in the game. My grandson lives in Nicasio. And, I just keep closing my eyes and seeing Ethel walk up to the mic, and I'm just trying to think, but what she would say. I don't know if I can quite channel it, but I'm sure a lot of people here could. But, I know for Ethel, really, the integration, of our nonprofit sector and our public school sector, was just critical to her. And I've looked through everything mostly through a West Marin lens, because I've gotten to hang out there for over 40 years. And there's really some amazing work going on there, and I think some really good models, in John's, Bellina Stinson district, and in Lagunitas, there's some really exciting things happening, and the partnership our community center has, with the Lagunitas School District is, really rich and growing. Don was so supportive of that for so many years and continues to be. So I guess, that's my question, how we've got some good models that are happening, but I just really think that integration, and I don't know if there's anybody here from Shoreline District, but there's been some amazing work the last 2 years out there. So I know that's a lot, what I'm thinking about. I'm really looking forward to this afternoon when we get our different sectors together. So I think there's some great models out there that we can hear from.
Thank you.
All right, I see all you in the middle. Just one here, and then I'll be that way.
Quick question, I was told. So I am a family advocate with Children and Family Services, so I work with a couple Head Start classrooms. My question is, what kind of support is available for families in the TK system? Right now, I have a few families that are interested in TK, but because they have to move off-site, that moves them farther away from home. So what support services are available for families within the classroom as well?
And that's something that each of our districts is looking at. In the guidance that we have from the state, they do call out how Head Start has done that family support so well, and really sort of points towards that program as one to really look at to support the whole family. We have schools who are looking at the community school model. We have a lot of different strategies around that. But I think that our systems are really going to be looking towards the great work of the Head Start system to think through those, especially at that early childhood level.
And whether TK teachers' role will incorporate this sort of early childhood tradition, I think, is a huge question. Or do TK teachers start to look like 6th grade teachers and don't talk to parents? So I think that's another big challenge.
Okay, while I'm coming across, I just wanted to mention Mary Jane talked about the Strong Start initiative that we had in 2016, and we just discussed it at the First 5 Commission meeting, recognizing that 5 complete years of $12 million had gone by, and that would have been $60 million had we gotten 2,500 more votes.
Hello, everybody. I'm Terry DiMartini, currently with the Sarderman Institute at the College of Marin, but also I want to say the proud founding director of the Marin Childcare Council, and I really want to compliment Aideen for how the council helped the child care providers through this very difficult 2 years. I also recently was on the board of the San Geronimo Children's Center, and a few years ago, we lost all of our 4-year-olds to TK. And it almost shut down the center because that was a significant part of our funding. And we only survived because, fortunately, we had instituted an infant toddler program, so we lowered the age for the infants to 18 months, and that brought us in the number of families that we needed to keep going. My other question is around staff development. If the program, the system, is going to need 11,000 new teachers and 25,000 new aides, all of which will have to be educated, I hope, how is that planned to roll out? And I know Peggy, I'm going to pass this to Peggy because I know Peggy wants to talk about the role of the early childhood departments in the community colleges in all this, right, Peggy?
Take it from there.
I'm Peggy Dodge, and I coordinate the early childhood education program at College of Marin, and also the Siderman Institute for Excellence in Early Care and Education. And I'm really concerned about the workforce. You know, we keep hearing the statement that we keep hearing the statement that the early childhood workforce looks like the kids and families they serve, and the K-12 system does not. I go to webinars with the state, they say that same thing, but I'm not hearing any strategies to fix that. So I think we really have to be more creative about this approach to credentialing. And one of the things I would like to know if other people are considering is that we look at early childhood teacher certification like we do RNs. So they do it at the community college first. That's what they do. They go to the community college and they become RNs. And then they can go on for their BAs and other training. The community college system in California has been training the workforce that's where the expertise in training the early childhood workforce is. And none of the plans that I'm hearing, and Leah, maybe you know more, or Aideen, maybe from some of your things, I don't think we've solved the issue of how do we get those TK teachers qualified, and who are these assistants that we keep talking about? I mean, I'm hearing lower standards of ratios for young children and lower standards of teacher expertise in the profession of early childhood education, which has a specialized knowledge base. So those are my worries, and the workforce is my thing.
Leah?
The workforce is my thing too, Peggy. You know, so I'm a native Californian, and I would like to think and would love to point people to California as a leader in early childhood and early care and education, and we once were, but we're not. And that cuts across the board. It cuts across education and training and certification and decisions we make about who and what gets valued. It has to do in how we organize and arrange our universal public programs like TK and our public preschool programs. It has to do with how we treat the workforce. You know, people are looking now to, you know, and no shade on any other state, but people are looking to Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Carolina, Florida as leaders in how to do things better and different for early childhood education and the early childhood workforce. You know, there are really innovative things happening in other places like Florida, New Mexico, that are you know, working with community colleges and public universities to offer bachelor's degrees in conjunction with the community colleges that are doing kind of pathways that are you know, really accessible at the community college level and centering that even advanced education in the community colleges. You know, other states are paying their workforce directly to go to school, participate in education and training. California, we decimated our stipend program that supported people to go on to education and training. Some counties have kept versions of that. So, I would love to say that I'm hearing something else different than you're hearing at the state level, but I'm not. Maybe somebody else up here is, but I'm not. And I think it's really unfortunate. I think the state is hearing from people. I think they need to hear more from people. And again, I think a lot of pressure can come from local leadership to the state, because I'm not sure the state is actually listening to the workforce. I'm not sure they're listening to parents. I'm not sure they're listening to advocates or people who are working in community colleges and our universities either.
Hi, my name is Maggie Root, and I'm the proud parent of twins who are preschool aged, one of whom has disabilities. And my question for the panel is really about opportunities and challenges you see as we move to TK for inclusive education for children with disabilities. Having twins, one neurotypical and one not, I found a dearth of opportunities for my kids to be in the same classroom, and I really worry about this in the TK process, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So I think just public education. This is where we do. This is where we really shine. We're highly cognizant of the various needs of students, particularly those with disabilities. And so I feel like we're well prepared for stepping into that realm. The county office already runs a preschool program that does support those students with disabilities. So I think that's a space, and also with English language learners as well, that we really bring a lot to the table that way. But I think you made a good point about Shoreline, and the Shoreline model is one that we're looking to as we've seen a nice merger of the two worlds come together. And I think we're going to continue to be systems that are learning from each other and finding those bright spots of opportunities and then replicating that throughout the county.
We good?
Yeah.
Okay. Give it up for our panelists. Thanks for your time.
Okay, everybody, she's back. Let's hear it. Yay, we're so excited. We couldn't be more excited. As I mentioned, how is it that we, of all the places, right? All the places, 58 counties, all the gatherings that are happening across this great state on behalf of our youngest learners, we get the State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Let's hear it for him. We are so darn lucky. All right, so what I want to do is just take a few minutes and provide you some background about what makes our state superintendent the best in the country. And it has truly, and what it has to do with is he's got lived experiences that many of our kids have. And he's been able to identify the strategies that worked for him, and then to identify the strategies and programs he wants to be absolutely sure are available to each and every child throughout this great state. So here we go. I'm honored to introduce our 28th State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurman. Superintendent Thurman is our first Afro-Latino and second African-American to hold this position. His own life story illustrates the vital need for and the value of strong public education for all children, regardless of income, race, ethnicity, disability, sexual orientation, or immigration status. Superintendent Thurman came from humble beginnings. His mom was an immigrant from Panama who became a teacher in San Jose, California. His father was a soldier who didn't return to his family after the Vietnam War. And when his mom died, when Tony was only 6 years old, he went to live for a cousin who he didn't know. The family relied on public assistance, and the good public schools for their success. He went on to Temple University, where he was student body president, and then earned 2 master's degrees from Bryn Mawr College. He then moved on to a career dedicated to public service. The career to public service he continues to this very day. He became a social service worker, focusing on foster youth and at-risk youth. He led programs for individuals with developmental disabilities and spent 12 years in direct education of life skills and career classes. He has 2 daughters, Jaden and Maya, who inspire his work and provide him his passion for this public service. He has served on the Richmond City Council and the West Contra Costa Unified School Board, bringing his focus on youth and local control to both of these positions. In the State Assembly, Superintendent Thurman served on the Education, Health, and Human Services Committee, and he chaired the Committee for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. We all know that to be STEM education. As the state superintendent, Tony Thurman has faced unprecedented challenges with courage, creativity, and wisdom, much like all of you in this room. Throughout the pandemic, he has kept his eye on the critical priorities, such as closing the digital divide, addressing equity issues in all areas, mental health services for students, and expanding access to early education. He secured $6.5 billion to safely reopen California schools for in-person. Let's hear it for Tony Thurman. For in-person instruction during the pandemic. He distributed $920 million in school meals during the pandemic and secured face coverings, all that PPE stuff that we know well, right, for students and staff across the state, including deploying over 3 million, by now it's probably 6 million or more, rapid COVID-19 tests at no cost. Superintendent Thurman recently joined with Senator Mike McGuire, who we know well, to urge the support of a bill that will help recruit 10,000 new mental health professionals to work in the schools and communities serving our youth. He also launched an initiative to ensure students learn to read by 3rd grade and has pledged to help secure passage of resources that would provide reading specialists and coaches for students in need. In addition, he's supporting key legislation to expand literacy programs, to fund home visits, dual language immersion programs, and to expand freedom schools. Superintendent Thurman understands, as I said at the beginning, he has a lived experience that many of us in this room don't have, and yet we have the opportunity to work with children and their families who have had lived experiences just like Tony Thurman. And so here we are with a leader who speaks from the heart, has passion, compassion, and a laser focus on what's best for all kids. And today, his focus will be on our youngest learners. Please join me in welcoming Superintendent Thurman.
Good afternoon. Buenos tardes. I know you all have been together for like 15 hours today, right? And so, so anyway, I feel like I should just say thank you, good night, because Mary Jane Burke just pretty much told you everything, right? Let's have a round of applause for an amazing superintendent and leader in Mary Jane Burke. There are not words to describe. She just told me, don't mess it up. There are not words to describe what Superintendent Burke means to me, but suffice it to say, she has been an incredible mentor and friend, and an incredible friend to students in this county, but in the state. She is one of the far most recognized superintendents in our state. and having accomplished the incredible feat of serving 7 terms as county superintendent here in Marin County. It's just amazing. I don't know how to say Marin County without saying Mary Jane Burke. They just go together. And it's been that way for a long time. In some ways, this is a kind of a small work homecoming. Many years ago, I had the honor of working for Golden Gate Regional Center in the Corte Madera office, serving families with developmental disabilities. And our social worker team, we would often reach out to Mary Jane Burke. And I also had the good fortune to serve as one of the district managers of the Marin City Special Services District. And so Mary Jane Burke won't remember it, but I've been reaching out to her for many, many years of those 7 terms, and she's always answered the call of support. Once again, for Mary Jane Burke, thank you. I know there's a few candidates who are running to replace her. I'll just tell you, it's a tough act to follow. And the best thing that you can do is just ask her for advice. And when I decided to run for state superintendent, after having been serving in the state legislature, Mary Jane was the first person to say, I will support you. And I'm grateful because it's a job. It is a job. And they don't tell you when you sign up that you might be serving in a pandemic, right? But we've all had that experience together. There is no playbook for the experience that we are having. And I believe this is the toughest experience that we will all experience in our lifetime. I don't have to tell you, with 900,000 lives lost in the pandemic, a disruption of every kind that you can imagine in our schools, in our businesses, in our communities, watching the spike in hate in our communities. And we have seen at the start of the pandemic, I mean, literally, the killing of George Floyd playing out on our television screens, the spike in hate against the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities, seeing mistreatment of immigrant children, and literally in not every state, but many states around ours, a kind of attack on our LGBTQ plus and transgender children. It is awful that we have a governor who would sign a bill, a governor in Texas, who would sign a bill that says don't say gay. Let me just tell you that in California, we more than say gay. We have said that we will provide resources, and we are providing resources to our LGBTQ plus students so that we can support them, because it's the right thing to do, and we see positive social academic benefits for our young people. And so just this week, as the governor was signing that awful bill, we convened the first meeting of what I call the Safe Bathrooms group to provide safe and gender-inclusive bathrooms for all, including our trans students in our state, so our students don't have to go the whole day without using a bathroom or being fearful of how they might be treated. And so thank goodness we are in California. There is much work that we must do, but the pandemic has been tough. We've seen a spike in anti-Semitic rhetoric throughout the pandemic. We have seen a political wave of candidates saying that we must not talk about race when we know that there are deep, deep impacts because of systemic racism. And if we can't talk about them, how do we set a trajectory to move past the impacts of that race? And so to say that it's been a difficult time is an understatement, but I know that we will find ways to go beyond. And because I don't know all the roster of all the education leaders here, but there are some who I do know, like Ida Times Green, who's been an incredible school board member who I've had the chance to serve with, and excited to see her become an assembly member representing this area. She said, say it again, excited to see you be an assembly member in this area. Just incredible leadership. Even before she served on the school board, she was having conversations with me, telling me what to do. I mean, making sure I understood some of the very important contributions being made in Marin City and in surrounding communities around early education. An incredible leader. And then to have the honor to have someone here today from the Marin Community Foundation, who I consider a friend, and even though I'm a lot older than him, a mentor. I have learned so much from him. And I hope that you all are enjoying his service and leadership as much as I am. When I came to Marin City as a special service district manager, he was already working there. He showed me how to do the job. When I left, he basically said, no, I'm going to show you how to do the job, and took over the job and has continued to do great things. And that's none other than Mr. Jonathan Logan, who is here from the Marin City Community Foundation. Just an incredible staple in this community, a great mentor and friend who's really knowledgeable about so many public service issues, and so it's really great to be here. Mary Jane told you my story, and it's why education is so important, and we talk about it all the time. And I know that you all have been really teeing up conversations about, oh, it's not there anymore, okay, about universal preschool and transitional kindergarten, and we don't parse out which program is better than the other. We think that early education is the special thing for California children, and there are many ways to get there. And I'm happy to talk about universal preschool and transitional kindergarten. I was on a school board in West Contra Costa when transitional kindergarten first was created in 2010. But we care deeply about our Head Start programs, and we care deeply about all of our childcare educators and what's being provided. This is a special moment for many of us. Many of us have been talking about the importance of early education for a long time. And we always talk about the continuum of ways to provide early education, because we know that when young people have access to early education, that they're more likely to graduate, they're more likely to go on to college, and less likely to drop out of school. I witnessed that in my own life, as you heard from Mary Jane, being the son of immigrants from Panama and Jamaica and Detroit, Michigan, by way of Mississippi. My father was a Vietnam vet who couldn't wait to get out of Detroit and went right into the U.S. Army and deployed to Vietnam. I found my father on the internet just before my 40th birthday. That's the first conversation that I had with my father. He talked about a kind of trauma that he experienced that made it difficult for him to reconnect with his family. He used a different word. He didn't say that word, but he said physical and mental scars that he experienced. And so, I grew up wondering, about my father and not knowing anything about him, and being raised really by my mother and extended family from Panama, who, my mother was a teacher who emigrated here from Panama, who became a teacher in San Jose, and who literally insisted that we would have access to the best education, to the best public education. I can remember, I don't even know what age I was. I can remember going to some preschool program. I think I lied about my age. I said I was older than I was because she wanted to make sure I was going to be in that program. She always understood the value of education, and she did her best to raise 4 children until she could not. My mom was sick. She had cancer, and when she passed away, the 4 of us were all split up. Well, some of us were split up. My younger brother and I both ended up in Philadelphia being raised by a cousin who we hadn't met until we showed up. Imagine that, if you would have a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old show up on your doorstep. Could you take them in and raise them as your own? I ask myself that question all the time. Being raised by my cousin, who was an immigrant herself from Panama, who didn't have a formal education. She worked as a nurse's aide and took care of ill folks. But she insisted that we would get the best education that was possible. My cousin, who I call Mom, she went to night school and she got her community college degree, and when she did, she had us stand right next to her as she took her degree. I like to think that she was trying to role model for us that higher education was possible. She did the same thing when she took her bachelor's degree, and I'll show you the pictures. We had these huge bow ties, and powder blue suits, and it's the 70s. I'd like to think that what she was really saying to us is that exposure matters, and setting the bar high matters, and setting expectations for getting an education matters. She never said the words college, but we went to schools, to public schools, where sometimes programs got mentioned like college prep programs, and even though there were maybe less than a handful of people in my entire family who'd gone to college, I was walking around saying, I'm going to college too. And where those students went, I went. And it has proven to be the opportunity to open doors. Now, we struggled along the way. There were many times when we did not have food in the house. My tia would say things like, God will provide. And I said, well, we hungry. What we going to eat? And we benefited from many, many public programs. I was on the free lunch program. And back then, you had to carry a little orange ticket around. We should never shame our families. But back then, I carried the orange ticket that meant I was on the free lunch program. And a lot of the kids made fun of me for having the orange ticket. I didn't realize it until I became an adult. Everybody in my school was on the free lunch program. I don't know why they were making fun of me, but we have moved to a place where we no longer should ever allow our families to be shamed. And you heard Mary Jane talk about the 900-some meals provided during the pandemic. It's why in the legislature I made a priority to make the free lunch program available for all of our kids. Now we have universal meals. 2 meals for any student, regardless of their background, will be provided. So I grew up on the free lunch program. I grew up, back then there was not an EBT card. Back then it was the food stamp coupon. The coupon book was in green and brown and blue, and you had to tear out the little coupon when you wanted to buy something. Somebody put their hand up, they're like, I was ashamed. I was ashamed when I had to purchase food with the coupon. It felt like every time I took the coupon book out, someone made an announcement, "Boo, we got someone using food stamps on aisle number 7. Again, we have to move past this shift past this culture that allows us to shame our families who are living in poverty, because we know many of our families live in poverty, and the pandemic has exacerbated that. And so, but for my family, these were the programs that helped us to overcome poverty. And we had one other public program that came to our house. I had a special delivery. We had government cheese delivered to my house. I sure hope they didn't serve you with government cheese today in your meal. Government cheese, for those of you who haven't had the pleasure, is a box, cheese in a box, wrapped in this very thick plastic and then placed in a box. If you could get through it, it's probably the best grilled cheese or quesadilla you ever had, but you had to get through it. We ate so much of this that I thought that the letters USDA were a brand name. These programs, plus getting a public education, literally saved my life. Education is a game changer. And people tell me all the time, they talk about barriers that exist, they talk about challenges, but I still have hope, because these programs opened the door for me to have the opportunity to become a social worker, work in schools, and do school-based mental health, and become the state superintendent of public instruction. We should give those opportunities to all 6 million of our kids in the great state of California. They deserve it. It is possible. Even in the face of the pandemic, I believe that we still can provide a great quality education for all of our students. You heard Superintendent Burke talk about the mental health proposal that we are leading, SB 1229, because we believe that students first must be able to heal from the trauma of the pandemic. And if you look at the data, it says that even before the pandemic, we probably had maybe 30% of the ability to meet the need of our students and families who have the need to work with someone from behavioral health. We believe that our students have to heal. We also believe that we have to support their recovery, and that our students' learning recovery will be supported by many programs. And if we have the graphic, I'd love to share it with you, what we call transforming schools, the way we're using expanded learning programs, and the way we're using transitional kindergarten and universal preschool to help our students recover. Our state will invest $4 billion in mental health programs for children from birth to age 25. And as we speak, we are implementing a $3 billion community school strategy that provides wraparound supports for our students. It provides health services, mental health services, social services, and what I call transformative services to end the school to prison pipeline, because we need to educate, not incarcerate our kids, and give them an opportunity. And so enters the importance of universal preschool. We know that these programs are important. We know that early access to education helps our kids. It helps us to offset things like chronic absenteeism, where even before the pandemic, we were seeing 10%. Students would miss 10% of school. That put them at risk to drop out. That put them at risk to not learn to read by 3rd grade. After the pandemic began, we're seeing that number has jumped in some districts, doubled, 20%, 30% in some districts. It is a simple equation. When students are not in school, they cannot learn. And when they're pushed out, they struggle to learn. And so we will address chronic absenteeism using programs like the Community Schools Initiative that we are implementing as we speak. You're going to hear me talk a lot about chronic absenteeism. You're going to hear me talking about the bill that we are sponsoring right now to ban suspensions in preschool. I don't know what you do to get suspended or expelled at the age of 3. But I do know that when we push our kids out of school, we are pushing them towards the criminal justice system. And so we are sponsoring legislation to ban suspensions in preschool because we want, again, to educate and not have our kids be incarcerated. We want to support all the early education programs that we can. And when I chaired the Budget Subcommittee on Health and Human Services, we continually increase the level of subsidy that we provide to our families who utilize subsidized childcare. Because we saw this really awful trend that the subsidy was, the way the subsidy worked, sometimes family members had to make a decision between getting a promotion at their job and being able to have access to subsidized childcare. That's a false choice that no one should ever have to make. And so we changed the formula so that a person can earn more money and still have great access to programs like subsidized childcare. And we know that we have to do everything that we can to provide more education to our early educators. We have to provide training and better compensation for anyone who serves our kids. You know, a lot of times in this country, people give lip service. They say, oh, the kids are our future. But we pay those who care for our kids minimum wage or less. And if we say that these kids are our future, then we should do what they say. When I got to the legislature, they said, you show your value by what you put in your budget. So if our kids are number one, let's fund these programs like they're number one, including those who care for our families. Let me thank the leadership of First Five. You know, we have an incredible partnership with First Five. I have to thank Michelle. Where's Michelle? Michelle Fidelli, thank you for the invitation. She's my neighbor, so she always invites me, and she's like, you go and show up. Thank you for the invitation. And to Pega, your new executive director, thank you. I apologize. I should have started this meeting the way I like to start First Five conversations. Talk, read, sing. It is one of the most recognizable slogans and ways to help families understand about the value of reading to our children, talking to our children, the way we support brain development, literally just by talking to our children, singing to them when they're born. I have 2 teenage daughters, and I don't know, they must just memorize jingles, but they're in the car just saying, talk, read, sing, singing it. And it is so powerful. And we are working now with First Five to help families across the state get access to books. We're going to help 1 million families get access to books who need them and support them. And we've accepted many donations already on this path. And First Five California has helped us identify the families who need the books. And we have some partners who've helped us make online books available. In a 3-month period, families in the state, through our partnership with Renaissance, have downloaded more than 5 million books in English, Spanish, and French in a 3-month period for free. And you know, I've named this campaign to say that we're going to help every child in this state learn to read by 3rd grade. And I gave myself a deadline to get it done by 2026. It happens to be the same time that the universal TK is going to be implemented by the end of 2026. And I thought to myself, this is a goal that has evaded our sector in education for so long. And I believe if we put the will behind it to make it happen, we can ensure that our kids learn to read by 3rd grade. You know, in my career, I've worked in dealing with chronic absenteeism, working with young people in the court system, and it is heartbreaking to know that still there are courts that make decisions about how many prison beds to build based on 3rd grade reading levels, and 3rd grade attendance. And so we can do something about this. And so it is for those reasons that I've announced that we will ensure that every student who enters kindergarten in the fall will learn to read by 3rd grade. We'll get this done by 2026. So transitional kindergarten is a very important part of that. I know that you all spent all day talking about it, so I won't spend a lot of time on the definitions. I appreciate the handouts here that you all have provided. And you know that this is an important, it is a free way for our students to get access to school. If your children are like mine, my oldest was a little too young for kindergarten. She was a very young 5-year-old. This is an opportunity for younger children at age 4 to have access to a free program taught by a credentialed teacher who will provide them with some play and some learning, but some preparation and exposure for what they will get when they come to school in kindergarten. And it is incredible that California has announced finally that we will have universal preschool for every 4-year-old in this state. And now that means also the combination of transitional kindergarten, again, Head Start. We have a number of private preschool programs. We have a number of childcare providers. We even have a conversation taking place right now in the state about whether or not there will be a way for private childcare educators to provide a form of universal preschool or a form of transitional kindergarten. And so we have a very robust system. There's some debate about it too. There's debate about universal TK, and I'm sure you all have discussed that, so don't throw anything at me if I touch on themes that you've already discussed. But as powerful as as transitional kindergarten is, it raised a lot of questions for many of our partners in the child care delivery space, because it meant that 4-year-olds who might have otherwise been a part of child care programs would no longer be available. And as I've heard it from some of our friends and partners in a lot of our programs, they've said simply it changes the ability of many of our child care programs to be able to meet their financial bottom line. Because of the high costs of supporting younger children, infants and 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds, without the 4-year-olds to help balance those costs out. And so clearly there are many implementation challenges that still need to be addressed as it relates to transitional kindergarten. And I'm a big fan of it, don't get me wrong. When I was on the school board and transitional kindergarten was first announced, it was announced without any funding. And so that meant that our district, right, another unfunded state mandate, that's why I ended up going to Sacramento in the first place, to say no more unfunded mandates being passed down. If we say it's important, let's provide the funding to get it done. And so, yeah, you can put your hands together there. That's a great place to put your hands together. I have a lot of bills I want to tell you about, and I hope that you all will help to advocate in getting them passed, because those bills are threatened simply because they carry a cost. And I always say the same thing. What's the cost to not making these investments? There's no reason that California should ever have been 37th or 45th in the nation in per pupil spending. We are the 5th wealthiest economy in the world. That means that our kids need to be number 1 in what we provide in per pupil spending and what we provide for them and for their educators and for their families. And so we've got work to do as it relates to implementing transitional kindergarten. We're going to need to recruit 10,000 new teachers to support the full implementation of this program. And I'm sure you all have noticed we are experiencing a workforce shortage in education. in every sector, but certainly in education and in every state. And so right now we have legislation that we're working on to retain 15,000 classroom teachers. We have scholarships available, $500 million worth of scholarships for anyone who wants to become a teacher, and $350 million to support residency programs, because we want to diversify our workforce. We want to, because research shows when you simply have one black teacher, that African American students do better, all students do better across all groups. And so we want to diversify the workforce. We want to provide training to offset bias. We want to make sure that we are supporting our students at every single level. And don't get me started on the technology. Well, if you look at the data about what has happened during the pandemic, we know that 50% of our students are at grade level in English language arts, and only two-thirds of our students are not at grade level in mathematics. This is all during the pandemic. If you think about how this pandemic began, with 1 million students in our state who did not have access to a computing device at home or access to high-speed internet, it is not a full surprise that we would see this growth in the opportunity gap. And so we created a task force that we call Closing the Digital Divide, to make sure that our families would get access to tools and that we'd have access to family literacy training supports. And Mary Nicely, who's here today from our office, our chief deputy, worked with a number of our foundation partners. We got grants to do family literacy, technology literacy supports for our families. You know, there was a time when we could not, even though the state was providing $2 billion to our schools to buy computers and hotspots, there was a time when there were no computers and hotspots to be had. I don't know what you did, Mary. You can tell your secrets if you want, but Mary found a way to help us get more than 1 million devices held just for California students to make sure that every student would have access to a device and a hotspot. We followed that up by securing $6 billion to make sure that we have broadband for our families all across the state, because we believe that internet connectivity should flow like electricity, especially in a state like California that has resources, and we are literally living, not far from Silicon Valley. We have access to the technology. It is hard to imagine that this digital divide has existed all these years. But that's what the pandemic has done. It put a spotlight on inequities that have existed for many, many years. And it gives us a push to say that we must build back a better system in education to close those disparities and those inequities. And so transitional kindergarten is a very important part of that. Early education is a very important part of that. We try to blend them together. We are working to implement transitional kindergarten by 2026, along with the Community Schools Initiative, partnering with our governor and our behavioral health community on the mental health initiative, partnering to provide training to our districts. We're implementing a $10 million grant for anti-bias education and expanded learning opportunities so that our educators who help our students before school and after school provide more resources to support our students. There's some bills that we're sponsoring that we hope you will get behind, like SB 952. This is a bill that will allow our schools to be converted into dual language immersion schools. Because we know just like early education supports brain development, so does acquiring a second language. And so this bill will allow any public school to become a full dual language immersion school, because we talk about literacy and biliteracy in this state. And we want our students to be able to read and write in more than one language. And we know it supports their brain development. We know it supports academic success, closing the opportunity gap, and it creates global citizens of the world. And so we're implementing quite a few things. Sometimes our school districts tell us, whoa, it's too much too soon. It's hard, and I say to them, hey, don't say that too loud, because we don't want people to misinterpret that as the funding is not needed. What they're saying is that they need the ability to build the pathway and the infrastructure for these new things. If we're going to provide universal meals, that means a lot of school districts have to upgrade their kitchen facilities, provide training to their staff, It means that we have to make sure we move away from processed goods and foods. We were just with Alice Waters this week talking about what we now call farm to school, right? We always said farm to table. Now we're saying farm to school. And I named Alice Waters as an ambassador to the California Department of Education for her work to create these edible schoolyards where children learn about nutritious food, they get to grow it, and they actually reinforce classroom learning. And so we are implementing all these programs while building up the capacity of our school districts to be able to implement these things. But we know that we have to do that, and we know that we have to address the trauma that our kids have experienced during the pandemic. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts and questions about transitional kindergarten, about universal preschool, about how it fits into the whole bucket of programs that we call Transforming California Schools, about our literacy efforts to make sure that students have access to books and libraries and multilingual materials. All these things are going to allow our children to heal, to recover, and to thrive as we go forward to support our 6 million students in the great state of California. Thank you so much for being here.
Questions? Questions or comments? Don't be shy.
Thank you. I always hate to go first. I think that's the rest of you too, huh? So I'll just break the ice. Thank you. I appreciate all those things you've done and said, and appreciate Mary Jane Burke for all her years too. We're going to miss her. I'm Jenny Pfeiffer, and I'm on the Board of Trustees at Billina Stinson School, and we are fortunate to have in our district a 3- and 4-year-old program and a TK program that's in with our kindergartners. And it's working well, has some bugs. What I'm asking about is your comments about teachers and the money you're going to put into helping them. I have a couple of questions. One is, what do you have in your bag of tricks that you're going to deal with student debt forgiveness, loan debt forgiveness for students? And also, given that early childhood and First Five, Marin First Five has just done some remarkable forums and put some things out there for people. It's been incredible. Those first 5 years we know are the foundation for what's going to happen with kids in their school years after that. So it is crucial. Here's the thing. What are we doing to bring those families along with those kids? Those parents that can't afford to take time off work, how are they going to be involved in the programs? Or can there be some sort of a coupon system or something? So how can we support those families? And what about student debt? Those are my 2 questions.
Got it. Thank you, Trustee Pfeiffer. Just drop it just like that, all the easy ones right in front. Yeah, that's how you break the ice. That's how you chisel the ice. I like how you said, what's in your bag of tricks? Mary, did you bring the bag with all the money for the schools here? There actually are some things that I think get California off to a great start and in better position. I'm proud that as a legislator, I was able to vote to make all 2 years of community college free in the state of California. We have an incredible community college system. We just don't invest in it enough. And we've got to do better with our community college system, our UCs and our CSUs. Let's face it, these are the pipeline programs for our educator community. And so we need to see more investment, and every year there's been a little bit more invested through the final budget, and we're looking for more this May. I would point to, again, $500 million in grants for anyone who wants to become a teacher, the $350 million in residency programs to support those who might need to work while they go to school to get a credential. There are tremendous opportunities. There's another grant that allows classified staff who want to become educators to have formal educators as teachers to receive a scholarship to do the same. We have all the resources. I believe we have to put it together in a way that is a seamless way to recruit and thoughtful way to recruit. I think our biggest threat is providing is this failure of our system to provide good quality compensation and training to those who would be in the field. We've done surveys to find out why teachers and staff are leaving. And even before the pandemic, the number one reason that teachers would leave were working conditions. And now imagine during the pandemic, the fatigue that our educators have experienced. And so the working conditions have gotten tougher. We hear from our classified staff, our custodians and our bus drivers and those who serve the meals, many of them saying that they've left for other jobs, and they said that they can make more money in fast food than they can in serving our kids. And we know that some of our partners in early education have said the same. Shame on our systems for allowing that, and we have to change that. We'll show our values by what we put into our educators and support. Let's have a round of applause for all of our educators here at every level. Childcare, preschool, pre-K through 12, we want to appreciate you. And so these programs are in place. Again, we are promoting SB 1229 in conjunction with Senator McGuire that would give $25,000 scholarships to anybody who wants to become a school counselor of any kind. We are anchoring to train and recruit 10,000 more mental health clinicians to support the kids in California. We hope you'll support the legislation, and we hope that you'll invite us to come and see some of those programs for 3- and 4-year-olds that we can replicate statewide. We'll put the spotlight right on you. We'll show everybody. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We'll be live. Thank you, Trustee.
Okay, we have another question here.
I've heard a lot of talk about working with the private and community sector in childcare. I'm not exactly sure what sort of plans there are for doing that, and what's happening with the SB 976, which I think would accommodate that.
Could you tell me which bill that is, SB 976, author, and what it does? I don't even remember the bills that I introduced as a legislator.
It's universal preschool community-based providers. Connie Leva.
Oh, this is Senator Leva's bill?
Yes.
I've not had a chance to read it, but as I understand it, Senator Leva's bill wants to create a parallel way for the delivery of transitional kindergarten, meaning not just in a school setting, but allowing those who run child care programs to also be able to provide transitional kindergarten. As I understand it, the bill is still recently introduced, literally within the last few weeks. Yes. And so we'll have to go through the Senate, a number of committees in the Senate, and if it gets off the Senate floor, then to the Assembly, and then by the end of June or July, would be in position to be signed by the governor.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to welcome back former First Five Commissioner Brian Clement.
Thanks, Michelle.
All rise, the Honorable Commissioner Brian Clement.
No, appreciate it. Also, I remember you from WCC USD years. Just inquiry about how you envision trauma, adverse childhood experiences, and our new awareness of best practices as a through line for our systems of care, both family and school. Just a question.
No, I'm sure you all have seen this in your role, in your work, as parents, as family members. Our children have suffered during the pandemic. We're a social people. We're not meant to be disconnected. And from the very start, our students experienced that disruption and struggled. And as a result, we see a rise in depression, a rise in hospitalization rates, sadly, an increase in suicide rates. And so we know that our children have experienced trauma. We all have. The whole world has experienced trauma. But as adults, we have more experience. We have more lived experience to help us experience life beyond just the trauma. And for our young people, imagine being a middle schooler for the first time during the pandemic, or a high schooler for the first time in the pandemic, or being in kindergarten or first grade. You've never stepped foot on campus. And then here's the pandemic. And so I visit a lot of schools, and what I hear in schools is the same thing, that there is, our staff in our schools are witnessing a high degree of emotional needs of very young children, a lot of emotional outbursts, a lot of crying. For our older children, sometimes it breaks out in terms of behaviors. And so we're doing a number of things, including helping our schools learn how to draw down Medi-Cal to provide more mental health services, because Medi-Cal is a federal entitlement. That means you cannot say no to students who qualify. And having spent 5 years working in school-based mental health, I've seen firsthand how you can use Medi-Cal programs to support all kinds of wraparounds and mental health supports. I mentioned the program that we will be working with the governor's office and the legislature to implement a $4 billion mental health initiative. It's called the Children's Behavioral Health Initiative. It essentially says we create no wrong door for someone who is in need of mental health, whether you're being supported through Medi-Cal or private insurance, getting all of the providers together to fill the gaps that exist as it relates to the service delivery. And so we know that ACEs have a powerful impact on children and families, but we are positioned with resources that we've never seen before to speak to the mental health needs of our students. But if we don't have the workload to deliver it, that's my concern. If we don't have people ready to deliver those services, how will we help our students? Pediatricians and mental health experts have said that our students will continue to experience the pandemic for at least 5 or 6 years more. And so that tells me we've got to have the workforce to support our families, and that's why we're authoring SB 1229. We hope that you'll support it. I can think of no more important function right now than helping us address the trauma that our students have experienced during the pandemic.
Get ready.
Uh-oh.
So the topic is community schools grants.
Yes.
And I want you to know that our schools have been working very closely with community partners, nonprofit in our community called Marin Promise, as well as the Strive effort. We have 4 or 5 districts that have applied. We got it all in on time, pressed the button, I think 2 days ago.
All right.
And the plan is that these will not just be siloed schools that will be working, but rather in addition to their work individually, they'll be working as a collaborative group on behalf of all the students. And so, given that you're the state superintendent of public instruction, might you be able to guarantee that we get these grants?
I'm not mad at you that you asked that question. I think you know that I won't be one of the readers of the grants, but there are criteria in how the grants are distributed that prioritize communities that have high percentages of students who are on free and reduced lunch, high percentages of English learners, students who have experienced other challenges. And so it is hard for me to imagine that major communities like this one would not find some resources coming their way. But I can't sit here and say that we're promising you, Mary Jane Burke, that you're going to get a grant, because somebody's going to tweet that out. And so that's why I stay out of it. But we have a criteria that prioritizes need. It also prioritizes the needs of rural communities, recognizing that many rural communities have been without mental health providers for a long time. If you think about it, in our rural communities in the state, at least 20 counties experience fire and natural disaster at the same time that we are dealing with the pandemic. And so, so having counselors available to provide trauma-informed care from those who experience, loss of a home, loss of school, maybe even loss of a loved one, it has been a critical need. And so we think that community schools is a game changer for moving that. Now, $3 billion is a lot of money, but that goes fast when you think about 58 counties, 1,000 districts, and 10,000 schools. And so the conversation that we're having around community schools is how do we braid other types of funding to support the needs that community schools will address. We want every one who receives a community schools grant to have community school coordinators who can connect families to important resources. But we also know that we'll have to draw down on Medi-Cal dollars and foundation community dollars, and our foundations, I like how you turned around to look for the Marin Community Foundation. The Marin Community Foundation, like all of our major community foundations, have been completely supportive. Everyone is just lined up to be supportive about how we implement this strategy, and we think that there will be ways to ensure that this and every community receives support. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a quick question in the back here.
Hi, I'm Michelle Cernsich Hodge, and I am a school board trustee in Mill Valley and also a candidate for Marin County Superintendent of Schools. And my question for you is that, this transitional kindergarten program and thrust really meets the needs of our underserved communities. And we know in Marin County, we have the highest equity gap in the state. So I'm wondering, how is the board that you, the Department of Education that you represent, helping our communities to reach those families? And as we know, after the pandemic, we have families that don't want to let go of their loved ones, and many who culturally, for whom transitional kindergarten is not going to be the first thing that they are going to want to look at. So how can you help us to reach those families and make them feel safe and excited to be able to put their children in what we know is a critical first step in their child's public school journey? Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Cernsich Hodge. This is turning into a candidate forum, but I appreciate what you've asked. I'm going to ask Mary, if you have it, the bill number with Assemblymember Bonta for the family engagement-based literacy program, so we can share that out. I think family engagement is everything. And Trustee, I think when you try to enforce a program on someone, that just doesn't work. We've seen that. And families have pushed back on many things. I think it's about building partnership with our families. During the pandemic, we created the first ever family engagement unit at the California Department of Education, because the feedback that we received is that many districts in the state, families felt disconnected from their local districts. They couldn't get information. In those early days in the pandemic, some families said, we don't have a computer, we can't even get paper packets from our school district, and students were falling behind. We saw a massive disparity between what African American families, English learner families, and rural families were receiving compared to their peers. And so we created a family engagement unit to help school districts learn how we can all be better partners to our families. And we are sponsoring a piece of legislation that says when we talk about literacy and early education, we also have to do it in a way that has family engagement built into it, and cultural competency. And the messenger is very important. And so, as a social worker who's knocked on a lot of doors and done a lot of home visits, it's very important that when someone shows up at your door, it's a trusted messenger who you can trust. There's a lot of lack of trust about many things. And so in some cases, the school will be the center. In other places, it'll be a community center. It'll be a house of worship or a faith community, that we find ways to reach our families in multilingual ways, that we have trusted messengers, and that we make family engagement a priority. We're working with our state PTA. We're working with community-based organizations. Our mental health bill that I've mentioned with Senator McGuire envisions that we'd be working with upwards of 40 to 50% of community-based organizations that also partner. We're looking for partnerships with schools and community-based organizations, districts and counties, houses of worship, all together to reach our families. Again, we want to create a way where there's no wrong door to go through. And our family engagement literacy bill will be able to engage families to know not only can you get these books or resources for your family, but access to adult education programs, access to resource programs. Hopefully they'll tell them about the bill we're sponsoring to give paid internships to students who are in our career technical education programs, because guess what sector we want them to go into? Education and early education. And so we're trying to align all these opportunities to make the deepest impact for our families and many of our families who've been left out. And Mary also secured a grant, as I mentioned, to help us work with families on technology, getting comfortable with the use of technology. And so we want to make sure that everything we do has a family engagement lens. I'm sensing that there's a bill number coming my way.
2465.
Bingo, we got a winner, AB 2465 by Assemblymember Bonta. This would be a family engagement literacy focus that we think is all about early awareness. There are many components to the transitional kindergarten that are also about promoting early education awareness for families. Now, there is a bill that will get some families upset. There's a bill that would make kindergarten attendance a requirement. And so that will be something that may not be for everyone. It's not our bill. I'm just saying that there is a bill. But what we think is important is that all young people get access to early education. Again, we don't parse out what's the best way to do that. We respect family choices, and some family members are going to make the choice to educate their children at home. Some would prefer to be with a trusted childcare provider. In our home, with our two children, one daughter was in a preschool program. Another daughter went to a bilingual, a childcare program operated by a bilingual educator. It varies, and we are not trying to step on any familial choice, but we know that early education means our kids are going to be successful, learn to read by 3rd grade, and graduate, and by the time you're the county superintendent, make sure that we're getting them to you in a good place. How's that?
We have time for one last question.
Okay, so I have heard a lot today about supporting children from the very earliest of ages. I've heard a lot about kindergarten, transitional kindergarten. I've heard a lot about childcare centers.
Yes.
I'm actually here because I'm a childcare provider. And if you take the 3.5 and 4-year-olds out of our program, where do we stand? How are you going to connect with us family childcare providers who do huge amounts of professional development hours, who has already learned the social emotional pieces, how to teach these children from 0 to 5? How are you going to help us connect with the school districts and be a part of the question, the beginning part of the question, to help facilitate the continued growth that we provide going into this program?
I'm just going to appoint you to be in charge of all of it because you're doing the work. Let's give you a round of applause and thank you for what you do. I recognize that there are probably lots of questions that still have not been answered about how all of this will be implemented. But let me just say this. I do not see this as a one or the other kind of strategy. I think that we have to be looking at all kinds of opportunities where families make choices about what they want for their children and their family, and partnership. And you'd be a great partner. And so can I appoint you to one of our committees that's working on how the implementation is working?
I would love to be a part of the conversation because I know I am a white American, born and raised here, and I know that 75% of our community is English language learners. My last name is Noyola, but I am not Hispanic. My husband is. And I know how much they are not considered or included because of the language barrier, because of the stigma behind when they do try and speak up. Again, I'm a white American that has no problem standing up and speaking my mind, but I know that a lot of us aren't. And we need to be included. A big part of us needs to be included.
And we want that inclusion. And here's my commitment to you. You tell me any corner of this state where we need to go where families are not being included, and we will show up and we will help them to be included because we got to be in this together. And this is not about any kind of competition. This has to be all of us working together. And if there are voices that are not being heard, we need to lift them up. We need to amplify those voices. There are 2 members of my staff team are here today to help me, but let's make sure we talk offline about any places where we need to make sure we put our special effort to make sure voices are included about the implementation. Here's the good thing. It's not too late. It's at the very beginning of the implementation phase. And so I'm offering to appoint you to be part of our conversations in a formal way, but there are ways that people can be involved informally to just give input in a safe, confidential way. Mary Nicely is here, our chief deputy, and one of our new deputy superintendents, Abel Guillen, is here, and I'll be asking you to point us in the direction of where we need to go, because we want to help all families feel included in these conversations. Thank you very much. Have I earned my lunch yet? You know, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'm sure there's some question that we didn't get to, and we want to hear about it. If there are things that you all discussed today and teased out in your conversations about where there are wrinkles in the implementation of transitional kindergarten, please let us know. Share it with the staff at First Five or with Superintendent Burke. Let us get that information to our staff at the Department of Education, who are working tirelessly to help make the implementation of transitional kindergarten as smooth as possible. But know that they care deeply about all of the programs that provide early education access to our kids. They don't have a favorite. And they remind me all the time that universal preschool is more than just transitional kindergarten. Right? Yeah, right? We finally got you. But it is the sum of all of these programs in childcare providers, Head Start, private preschool. It is all these programs together that's going to help prepare our students for a great future. And it is possible. And so we hope that we can all work together and that you will provide us with any outcome of conversations that have come up today about the implementation, especially when there are rough edges that need to get smoothed out. But this is something that I think ultimately will be great. There are many families who, for whatever reason, cannot afford to pay for any form of early education. To have a guarantee in the state of California that there will be something for free is powerful. And in that way, transitional kindergarten is a game changer. But it is not meant to stamp on or step on any existing way to serve our kids. So let's do it together. Are you with me? Let me hear you say yeah. Can we do this? Let me hear you say, oh yeah. You all are great. Thank you so much.
Let's give Superintendent Thurman another round of applause. That was so wonderful. We blew through the rest of the day and beyond. No one was even looking at the clock. So we are going to skip the regional report outs and just wrap up the rest of the day. And I just wanted to thank everyone for being here. I mean, what a day. I feel so energized by all the conversation and the questions that have been generated. I want to reiterate Mary Jane's comments in the morning about the fact that the success of this work is dependent on the partnerships that we build, the strong, meaningful collaboration in our county, and we have such a strong foundation to build on, and so I'm excited to see what our county will figure out together. I want to say a few thank yous. The first to all of our speakers, our panelists this morning. A round of applause to them. To Mary Jane Burke, of course, to all the MCOE staff who helped make this day possible. It was not just Michelle and I. And of course, Michelle, who is the mastermind behind the forum. So thank you all. And we will be gathering all the notes. The MCOE staff have already wrapped them up and taken them back to the office, I'm sure, to type them up. So we'll be sharing all of that learning out with you. The recordings will be shared. And this is just the beginning. So thank you all. And one more thing. May 6th, we have our policy breakfast on childcare. So please join us, and you'll receive emails on that.